If we had left 10 minutes earlier, my sister would still have both her children with her. I need to say that up front because everything else I'm about to tell you bends around that fact. 10 minutes. The length of a second cup of coffee. The time it takes to argue about whether to bring the dog. We brought the dog. And then we lost him. And then we lost Paloma, not to death, not exactly, to something I still don't have a word for. She's alive. I believe that. But she's not with us, and she's not Paloma anymore. And I'm the reason she was close enough to be taken. My name is Callaway Amadeo Restrepo. Most people call me Cal, which I've never corrected, even though my mother picked Callaway specifically because she didn't want it shortened. I was 31 years old and working as a veterinary technician at a mixed practice clinic in Bridgeton, New Jersey, when the power died. I say mixed practice because that matters. We treated cats and dogs and rabbits, but we also drove out to the farms for cattle and horses, which meant I knew how to handle large animals in distress, how to read panic in a creature that outweighs you by 1,000 pounds. That second skill turned out to be more transferable than the first. The clinic was called Delaware Valley Veterinary Associates. Dr. Phan ran it. He was a quiet Vietnamese-American man in his 60s who chewed cinnamon gum constantly because he'd quit smoking 11 years prior and never got over the oral fixation. I mention Dr. Phan because he's the one who noticed before any of us did. He came into the back treatment area on a Tuesday. I think it was a Tuesday. Though the days lost their names pretty quickly and said the cattle on the Ecker farm were wrong. Not sick, wrong. They were standing in formation, all facing the same direction, southwest, and they wouldn't move. He said it like a man who'd been a veterinarian for 38 years and had run out of templates for what he was seeing. I didn't think much about it. I was in the middle of a dental cleaning on a 14-year-old beagle named Crouton. And my mind was on Crouton's rotten left premolar, and on the fact that my sister Marisol had called me 3 times during the procedure. Marisol was the kind of person who called 3 times and then texted, "Never mind," and then expected you to call back anyway. I loved her. I love her. The tense depends on what part of the story I'm telling. I called her back during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the gravel lot behind the clinic, eating a gas station empanada that was more dough than anything. She wanted to know if I was coming to the house for the weekend. She and her husband, Caraldo, had bought a place in Lumberton the previous spring. A little Cape Cod with a fenced yard, 20 minutes from the clinic. Their kids, Paloma, who was 7, and Nico, who was 4, had been asking for Uncle Cal. Specifically, they wanted me to bring the dog. My dog was a 60-pound mutt named Herschel, who had 1 blue eye and 1 brown eye, and a nervous habit of licking his own front knee until it went bald. I told Marisol I'd come Saturday. That was, I think, 3 days before it happened. The warning signs were not dramatic. They were veterinary. On Wednesday, the day after Dr. Phan mentioned the Ecker cattle, I was pulling into the clinic lot when I saw 6 or 7 crows sitting on the telephone wire outside the building. That's nothing. Crows sit on wires. But these crows were silent. I'd been around birds my entire professional life, and I can tell you that a group of crows is never silent. They argue, they announce, they posture. These were sitting beak to tail in a perfect line, and they weren't making a sound. It gave me a feeling in my stomach that I associate with the moment before a dog bites that half second when you realize the body language has shifted and your hand is already too close. Inside the clinic, Dr. Phan told me 3 more farms had reported the same thing. Cattle standing still. Horses refusing to enter their stalls. A goat farmer out near Salem said his entire herd had pressed themselves into the northeast corner of their pen and wouldn't eat. Dr. Phan had called the County Agricultural Extension Office and gotten a recording. He'd called the state veterinary hotline and gotten a person who took a message and never called back. Animals know, Dr. Fan said, unwrapping a fresh piece of gum. Before earthquakes, before tsunamis, they feel the subsonic. They feel electromagnetic shifts. They know. Know what? I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. That's the question. By Thursday, the news had something. Not the animal behavior the news never picked up. The animal behavior, which still bothers me, but there were reports of widespread electrical anomalies along the eastern seaboard, transformers blowing in patterns, grid sections failing and resetting and failing again. The word cyber attack was being thrown around, then retracted, then thrown around again with different adjectives. I watched a segment on my phone during my break where a utility spokesman used the phrase cascading irregularities 4 times in 2 minutes without actually saying anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Herschel was on the bed with me, which I normally didn't allow, but he'd been glued to my side since I got home. He wasn't whining or shaking. He was watchful, ears rotating, nose working. He kept looking at the wall like he could see through it. I knew that posture. I'd seen it in dogs at the clinic before thunderstorms, a full-body orientation toward a stimulus humans can't perceive. Except this wasn't a storm, and whatever he was tracking wasn't moving. At 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with an emergency alert. The kind that makes the noise you can't silence, the one that vibrates your teeth. I grabbed it expecting an Amber Alert or a weather warning. Instead, I got 3 lines of text that I still remember word for word because I read them 6 times in a row trying to understand. Emergency alert. Regional power infrastructure failure imminent. Charge all devices. Fill bathtubs and containers with water. Shelter in place until further notice. This is not a test. I sat up in bed. Herschel was already sitting up. His ears were flat back against his skull in dog body language that reads as somewhere between fear and extreme alertness, depending on jaw tension. His jaw was loose. So, alertness. He was listening to something I couldn't hear yet. I called Marisol. She answered on the first ring. She'd gotten the same alert. Cal, what does imminent mean? Like tonight? I don't know. Geraldo's filling the bathtub. Should I be filling the bathtub? It feels like an overreaction. Fill the bathtub, Mari. Should I wake the kids? No. Let them sleep. Fill every pot, every container, every bottle. Do it now. I was already moving while I talked. I filled my own bathtub. Filled a 5-gallon bucket I used for mopping. Filled 4 water bottles and a soup pot. I plugged in my phone, my laptop, a portable battery pack I'd gotten for camping 2 years ago and used exactly once. I went to the kitchen and took stock. Half a loaf of bread, peanut butter, a jar of pickles, 2 cans of black beans, a bag of rice, some wilted spinach, eggs, hot sauce. It wasn't much. I was a single man who lived on gas station food and clinic break room snacks, and I was about to pay for it. Then I did something that mattered more than I realized. I drove to the clinic. At 2:40 in the morning, before the power had even failed, I drove to Delaware Valley Veterinary Associates, and I let myself in with my key, and I took the emergency veterinary kit from the supply room. Amoxicillin, cephalexin, metronidazole, tramadol, acepromazine. That last one is a tranquilizer we use for anxious dogs before procedures. I grabbed syringes, suture kits, gauze, saline, hydrogen peroxide, a digital thermometer, and the portable pulse oximeter. I grabbed ketamine from the locked cabinet because Dr. Fan trusted me with the key. I was thinking about the animals. and I was thinking about the farms, and I was thinking about sedation protocols for large animals in crisis. I was not thinking about the fact that almost all of these drugs work on humans too, in adjusted doses. That became relevant later. The power went out at 4:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was staring at the microwave clock when it disappeared. 1 second it said 4:47 in green numerals, and the next second there was nothing. Not just my apartment. I went to the window and looked out, and the streetlights were gone. The traffic light at the corner of Pearl and Laurel was gone. The glow from the strip mall half a mile east was gone. Everything was dark in a way that modern darkness never is. No ambient light, no hum. The refrigerator had been making its low, constant drone, and suddenly it wasn't, and the silence that replaced it felt biological, like the building had stopped breathing. Herschel pressed against my legs so hard, I almost fell over. I called Marisol again. The call went through the towers, must have still had battery backup. She was awake. Geraldo was awake. The kids had slept through it. She told me the whole street was dark. "Come here," she said. "Come to Lumberton. Don't wait." I told her I needed to check on the clinic first. Dr. Fan had animals in overnight recovery, 2 post-surgical cats, and a dog on IV fluids. The clinic had a backup generator, but it was old and temperamental, and I was the one who usually coaxed it into starting. "Cal, forget the clinic. There are animals on life support, Mari. There are children on this end. My children. Come here." She was right. She was absolutely right. But I went to the clinic first, and those 10 minutes, the 10 minutes it took me to drive there, to discover Dr. Fan had already arrived and already started the generator, to confirm the animals were stable, to have Dr. Fan grip my arm and say, "Go to your family, Calloway. Go now." Those 10 minutes are the hinge that everything else swings on. The drive from Bridgeton to Lumberton is normally 22 minutes on Route 77 north to the turnoff. That morning, it took me over an hour. Not because of traffic. There was almost no traffic at 5 in the morning, but because 3 intersections had accidents where the traffic lights had died. People running dark crossroads at speed. I saw a minivan T-boned into a telephone pole on Rhodestown Road. The driver's side caved in, and I slowed down, but there were already 2 people standing outside the vehicle, and one of them waved me on hard, like they didn't want me to stop. I didn't stop. I think about that. 6 miles from Marisol's house, the road was blocked. Not by an accident, by people. A group of maybe 15 or 20 gathered around the parking lot of a Dollar General. Some of them had flashlights. Some of them were arguing. One man was sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. I went around them, took a side road through a residential area where every house was dark and still. A woman was standing in her front yard in a bathrobe, just standing there, holding a phone that couldn't have been working. She watched me drive past and didn't wave, didn't call out. She was standing the way the cattle had been standing, facing one direction, waiting. I got to Marisol's house at 6:20 a.m. The sky was just starting to lighten. Geraldo met me at the door. He was a short, solid man who managed a tile warehouse and had the permanent calm of someone who spent his days solving logistical problems. He shook my hand and pulled me inside and said, "Your sister is trying to make coffee on the gas stove, and I think she's going to burn the house down." Marisol was in the kitchen. She had lit the burner manually with a match and was holding a saucepan of water over the flame, waiting for it to boil so she could pour it through the coffee filter by hand. Paloma was at the kitchen table eating dry cereal from the box. Nico was still asleep. The dog they had, a tiny Pomeranian named Churro, was under the table growling at nothing. I hugged my sister and she held on too long, and I knew she was scared. "What is this?" she asked. "Is this terrorism?" "I don't know." "The phones are spotty. Geraldo got through to his mother in Camden, but it cut out. I can't reach anybody else. Cell towers run on battery backup. They'll hold for a few hours, maybe a day if we're lucky. After that..." "After that what?" I didn't finish the sentence. Geraldo caught my eye and shook his head slightly, and I understood. Not in front of Paloma. We spent the first day doing what I imagine everyone did. We gathered, we inventoried, we listened. Marisol had more food than I did. She was a real adult with children and a grocery schedule, but it still wasn't as much as you'd want. Maybe 10 days worth if we were careful. Less if we were feeding 5 adults worth of anxiety. I say 5 because Geraldo's brother, Tomas, showed up around noon. He'd walked 4 miles from his apartment in Mount Holly after his car wouldn't start. Not the battery, the whole electrical system. He said the digital ignition was dead. He said he'd seen other cars on the road, older ones, still running. But anything with modern electronics was a coin flip. Tomas was 34, wiry, talkative, a roofer who'd broken his left wrist twice and walked with a slight hitch from a fall off a ladder 3 years back. He came in sweating and talking fast and immediately started checking all the locks on the doors and windows, which Geraldo had already done. But Tomas needed to touch them himself. "The Hendersons 2 streets over are packing their car," Tomas said. "They've got an old Chevy pickup, 80s model, and they're loading it up." "Going where?" Geraldo asked. Tomas shrugged. "Away. People are talking about a shelter at the high school, National Guard or something." We talked about that. Going to the shelter. It would mean resources, maybe information, maybe protection. But I'd worked enough emergency shifts at the clinic during storms to know how crowded, chaotic, and undersupplied shelters get in practice. And we had 2 small children and 2 dogs. "We stay," Marisol said. It wasn't a discussion. She said it, and Geraldo nodded. And that was it. But here's the thing I did. The thing I did wrong. Around 3 in the afternoon, our neighbor Delia Kwan came to the door. Delia was maybe 60, Chinese-American, lived alone in the house directly behind Marisol's. Their backyards shared a fence. She was a retired school bus driver with bad knees and a collection of ceramic frogs on her porch that Paloma loved. She came to the back door and knocked, and when I opened it, she was breathing hard and her face was the color of ash. "Something's wrong with Leonard," she said. Leonard was her cat. An enormous orange tabby I'd actually treated at the clinic once when he'd eaten a rubber band. "Wrong how?" I asked, because this was a language I spoke. "He bit me." She held up her hand. There were 2 puncture wounds on the web between her thumb and forefinger, swelling already, the skin around them flushed dark red. "He's never bitten anyone in his life. He's 13 years old. He was sitting on the windowsill and he just turned. His eyes went flat, like he didn't know me. I looked at the bite the way I'd look at any animal bite presentation at the clinic. Puncture depth, swelling radius, skin discoloration, heat. Cat bites are worse than dog bites. The teeth are narrow, and they push bacteria deep into the tissue, straight into tendons and joint capsules. Under normal circumstances, I would have told her to go to urgent care immediately. But there was no urgent care. There was no power. There was nothing. "Let me clean it," I said. I brought her inside. I cleaned the wound with saline from the clinic kit and hydrogen peroxide from Marisol's medicine cabinet. I wrapped it in gauze. Delia was shaking, and I made her sit down and gave her water. and she told me Leonard had been acting strange for 2 days, hiding under the bed, hissing at the wall, refusing to eat. And then that afternoon, he'd attacked her, unprovoked, with a ferocity she described as not him. "Where is Leonard now?" I asked. "I locked him in the bathroom." "Okay, good. Leave him there." "Is it rabies?" "Rabies in an indoor cat is extremely unlikely. It could be a neurological event. Cats can have strokes. His behavior could also be related to whatever's affecting the other animals, the cattle, the birds." I was giving her the clinical assessment. It was accurate as far as it went. But I was also doing what vet techs do when we're uncertain, defaulting to the most treatable diagnosis. We're trained to stabilize, not to panic. And that training made me stupid. Delia asked if she could stay. She was alone and frightened, and her hand hurt, and she didn't want to go back to the house with Leonard locked in the bathroom, making sounds she said weren't normal. I said yes. Marisol said no. She pulled me into the hallway and spoke in a whisper that was harder than shouting. "We don't know what's happening. We don't know what that bite is. You just told me animals are acting wrong, and you're bringing a bitten woman into my house with my children." "It's a cat bite, Mari. It's Delia. She brought Paloma a birthday cake last year." "I don't care if she brought her a pony. Something is wrong with the animals, and she just got bitten by one. And I have a 4-year-old asleep upstairs." "I'm telling you, as a medical professional, cat bite infections are bacterial. They're not airborne. They're not contagious person to person. I have antibiotics in the kit. I can manage this." There it is. That's the sentence. I can manage this. The confidence of a man who'd spent 8 years stabilizing animals in crisis and thought that qualified him to make judgment calls about something that didn't exist in any textbook. I pulled rank with credentials I'd earned holding down thrashing Labradors and expressing anal glands. And Marisol looked at me with an expression I will carry for the rest of my life. Not anger. Disappointment. The specific disappointment of someone who trusted your judgment and felt it buckle. Delia stayed. For 2 days, everything was what passes for fine when the world has stopped working. We established routines. Geraldo and Tomas reinforced the back fence and nailed plywood over the ground floor windows that faced the street. Not because we knew what was coming, but because the sound of hammering made us feel like we were doing something. I rationed the food into portions and wrote the meals on a whiteboard Paloma used for practicing her letters. We had water from the bathtub, water from the hot water heater that Tomas knew how to drain from the valve at the bottom, and water from a rain barrel Geraldo had set up in the backyard months ago for the garden. We were okay for water. Food was the clock. Delia's hand, though. I monitored it twice a day, the way I'd monitor a post-op site at the clinic. Temperature, swelling, drainage. I put her on amoxicillin from the kit, 500 milligrams every 8 hours, which is the standard protocol for cat bite cellulitis in humans. The dose was right. The drug was right. Nothing about what was happening to Delia was right. By the second day, the swelling had spread past her wrist, hot and tight, and the skin around the punctures had turned a dark purple-green that I'd only seen once before, in a dog that had been bitten by a copperhead. The amoxicillin wasn't touching it. Cat bite infections respond to antibiotics slowly, stubbornly, but they respond. This wasn't responding, and I couldn't figure out why. And the not knowing was worse than the swelling, because I'd built my entire professional identity on being the person in the room who could read what an animal's body was doing, and this wasn't in the manual. And Delia was changing. She got quiet. She stopped eating. She started sitting in the corner of the guest room with the blinds up, facing the window, facing southwest. She sat there for hours without moving. The posture reminded me of something specific, the way a dog in the clinic sometimes goes still before a seizure. A pre-ictal freeze, the body orienting itself toward whatever internal signal is about to fire. Marisol noticed before I admitted it to myself. "She's doing the thing," Marisol said to me on the morning of the 4th day. We were in the kitchen. Her voice was flat and controlled. "She's doing the thing the animals are doing. She's facing the same direction. She's going still. She's sick, Mari. She has an infection. People with fevers get disoriented." "Cal." My sister put down the pot. "You brought her in here. I told you not to and you overrode me. I need you to look at her with your actual eyes and not your guilt and tell me what you see." I went upstairs. Delia was in the guest room, sitting in the chair by the window. She was facing southwest. Her bitten hand was in her lap, and the gauze was soaked through with something that wasn't blood. It was darker, thicker, and it had an oily iridescence that caught the thin morning light. Her eyes were open, but she didn't track me when I walked in. I said her name. I said it 3 times. On the 3rd time, her head rotated toward me, not turned. Rotated in a smooth motion that had no muscular hesitation in it. And she looked at me, and her pupils were wrong. They were dilated to the edges of her irises, enormous, black, and they weren't round anymore. They were slightly elongated, vertical, like a cat's. I've seen dilated pupils in hundreds of animals. I know what mydriasis looks like from atropine, from fear, from neurological damage, from toxicity. I know what abnormal pupil shape means. And what I was looking at in Delia Kwan's eyes was none of those things. It was structural change. The iris itself was reshaping. I left the room and closed the door and stood in the hallway and put my hands on my knees and breathed. I was not panicking. I was doing what I'd been trained to do when an animal presents symptoms you don't recognize. Observe, document, contain. Do not let it out of the room. I went downstairs and told Marisol we needed to talk. I told Geraldo and Tomas. I did not tell the children. I described what I'd seen in clinical language, because that was the only way I could say it without my voice breaking. The wound was not responding to antibiotics. The patient was exhibiting neurological changes, including pupillary abnormality and reduced responsiveness. And in my professional opinion, something was being transmitted through the bite that was not any pathogen I'd been trained to identify. Marisol didn't say I told you so. She didn't have to. "We move her out," Tomas said. Fast, already decided. Back to her house. We give her food, water, the rest of the antibiotics. We barricade her in if we have to. "She's a person," I said. "She's changing into something. You just told us that yourself." "I said she has neurological symptoms." "Her eyes look like the cat's, Cal." He wasn't wrong. And this was the dilemma I'd built for us with my own hands, with my professional arrogance, with my 10-minute delay at the clinic, and my overriding of Marisol at the door. I had brought someone into my sister's house, and now that someone was becoming something I couldn't explain, and I had to decide what to do about it, while 2 children ate oatmeal at the kitchen table 10 feet away. Geraldo made the decision. He didn't frame it as a decision. He said, "I'm going to carry her next door. I'm going to set her up in her own living room with blankets and food and water. I'm going to lock the door from the outside. Cal is going to check on her twice a day through the window. That's what's happening." And that's what happened. Delia didn't resist, didn't seem to register what was happening. Geraldo set her in her recliner with a blanket and water bottles within reach. He closed the door. He came back. He washed his hands for 5 minutes with dish soap and didn't look at me. I checked on Delia through the window that evening. She was still in the recliner. By the next morning, she was on the floor, on all fours, facing the southwest wall. Leonard the cat was sitting on the back of the recliner above her, also motionless, also facing southwest. They looked like they were part of the same organism. If I hadn't known what I was looking at, I might have said they looked peaceful. That night, the neighborhood changed. The hum started around midnight, low, constant, coming from somewhere to the southwest. It was below the range of normal hearing, at least, below what humans normally register consciously. But I could feel it in my jaw and my chest. I'd felt subsonic vibration before. At the clinic, the ultrasound machine produces a hum that dogs react to before we can perceive it. This was like that, except it was everywhere. It was in the ground. Herschel heard it. Churro heard it. Every animal in the neighborhood heard it, dogs barking in houses up and down the block, a sound that rose and fell and rose again. And then, one by one, the dogs stopped barking. Not all at once, over the course of an hour, house by house. The barking turned to silence, and in the silence, movement, footsteps, dozens of them, slow, steady, synchronized. I looked through the gap in the plywood and saw them. People. Dozens of people. Walking down the street in the same direction, southwest, in a loose column. They weren't speaking. They weren't looking around. Their heads were tilted at that wrong angle, the same tilt I'd been cataloging in animals all week, the orientation posture, the full body alignment toward a signal source. Some of them I recognized Hector from 4 houses down, the teenage girl from the corner house, an elderly man in pajamas. They walked with a steady, mechanical gait, and among them, between their legs and at their sides, were animals. Dogs, cats, a raccoon, birds perching on shoulders, all moving together, all silent, all facing southwest. They passed without stopping. They didn't try the doors. They moved through the neighborhood like a migration, and they were gone in 15 minutes. Paloma had watched. I didn't know until I turned around, and she was standing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. She didn't cry. She said, "Uncle Cal, Churro went out the back door." The Pomeranian was gone. The dog door flap that Marisol had never gotten around to sealing. Churro had pushed through and joined the column and disappeared. Nico cried for an hour about Churro. Marisol held him and rocked him and looked at me over his head, and I understood what that look was asking. What do we do now? We needed to leave. Whatever was happening, infection through animal bites, recruitment through subsonic frequency, some kind of biological override drawn southwest, it was moving through the neighborhood. The house was a box sitting in the path of a current. But leave to where? Geraldo's Honda was dead electronics. My Subaru was dead electronics. Tomas didn't have a car. We were on foot with 2 small children, a dog, and no clear destination. Except I did have a destination. I'd had it memorized since I was 11 years old. My grandfather, Aurelio Restrepo, had come to New Jersey from Medellin in 1986. He'd worked in construction, then maintenance, then building management. He was a practical man who planned for things that hadn't happened yet because he'd grown up in a place where things happened without warning. 20 years before the power died, he sat the family down, my mother, my aunts, Marisol and me, all the cousins, and made us memorize a rule. If the power goes out and does not come back in 3 days, go to the church, not the one you attend, the one on Elias Street in Vineland, St. Dymphna's. Aurelio had worked on the building when they renovated it in 2003. He knew things about it that the congregation didn't. The basement was a Cold War-era civil defense shelter, sealed and stocked, with its own well access and walls thick enough to stop anything. He'd quietly maintained the shelter entrance on his own for years. He'd given each family member the combination to the padlock on the basement access door. 4/17/61. His wedding anniversary. Aurelio died 8 years ago. A stroke in his kitchen, fast and massive. He never saw what his rule was for. But when I was a kid, I once asked him why he kept going back to that church to oil hinges and rotate canned goods, and he said, "Because when the animals go first, the people follow. And when the people follow, you need to be underground." I thought he was being dramatic. I thought it was an old world superstition. Now I was standing in my sister's dark kitchen, remembering those words exactly, and understanding that my grandfather had seen something in the animal world, maybe in Colombia, maybe in some old knowledge that got passed down and lost its source, and he'd spent 20 years building an answer. "We go to St. Dymphna's," I told the group. It was 14 miles. We left at dawn on the 6th day. We packed what we could carry: water bottles, canned food, the entire veterinary kit, which I now understood was more important than almost anything else. We had flashlights, a kitchen knife, a crowbar Geraldo pulled from the garage, blankets rolled tight with bungee cords. Marisol carried Nico on her hip. Geraldo carried the heaviest pack. Thomas had the crowbar. I had Herschel on a leash and Paloma's hand in mine. The streets were empty, not just quiet drained. The houses stood with their dark windows and their closed doors, and they looked like they'd been empty for years, not days. The only sound was our footsteps and Nico's occasional whimper, and the distant hum from the southwest that I could feel in my back teeth. We stuck to residential streets. Geraldo led because he knew the area. Tomas walked rear guard with the crowbar. I was in the middle with the kids and the dog. My position wasn't random. I'd put myself there because I was the one who could read Herschel's body language in real time. If the dog showed preictal signs, if his ears pinned, if his gait changed, I needed to catch it before anyone else registered what was happening. That's where my training was still useful. Not in diagnosing the unknowable, but in reading the first physical signals before they became behavior. 3 miles in, Herschel stopped. All 4 legs rigid, tail stiff, ears pinned. He was staring at a house to our right, a single-story ranch with a chain-link fence and a swing set in the yard. The front door was open. Not damaged, just open. "Keep moving," Geraldo said. But Herschel wouldn't move. He was trembling, a fine vibration I could feel through the leash, and he was making a sound I'd never heard from him. Not a growl, not a whine, but a low oscillating tone that rose and fell in a rhythm that matched the hum from the southwest. He was vocalizing in sync with it, like a harmonic response. "Cal, the dog," Marisol said. I knelt down and put my hands on either side of his face. His fur was hot, not normal warm, but fever hot. His nose was dry. His pupils were slightly dilated, but still round. Still round. I checked that specifically because I knew what to look for now. Up close, I could hear the tone coming from his throat and feel it vibrating through his skull into my palms. The frequency was steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. "Herschel," I said. "Hey, come back." He blinked. The flatness receded. He licked my wrist once, twice, and then shook his whole body the way dogs do when they're wet. A full body reset, and he started walking again. Paloma was watching. She said quietly, "He's fighting it." At the 4-mile mark, where a residential street met a county road, we found other people. They were sheltering in a Sunoco station with the garage doors pulled down. 3 of them. A woman named Pilar Santana, maybe 50, stocky and calm, who'd been a home health aide on her way to a client when her car died. She'd walked to the gas station and been there for 2 days, rationing the snack aisle. A teenager named Josue Medrano, who said he was 16 and wouldn't say where his family was. Not yet. Not to strangers. And a man in his late 60s who introduced himself as Virgil Ashmore and who sat on an overturned bucket with his hands on his knees and the blank-faced composure of someone running on fumes. Pilar had actual medical knowledge, human medical knowledge, the kind that comes from years of managing medications and wound care and recognizing when someone needs a hospital. She looked at the clinic kit I was carrying, and her eyes widened. Amoxicillin, cephalexin, ketamine. Where did you get veterinary ketamine? I'm a vet tech. That ketamine will work on people in the right dose. I know. She looked at me for a beat. Then she said, "Who was bitten?" "A neighbor. She's not with us anymore." "Dead?" "Changed." Pilar absorbed that. Then she told us what she'd seen from the gas station window. A woman on Route 47, moving on all fours, fast, faster than running, with a dog beside her matching her gait stride for stride, moving southwest. Josue, who'd been silent against the wall with his arms around his knees, spoke for the first time. "They're not all like that," he said. "Some of them look normal. They walk upright, they talk. But their eyes are wrong, and they say things to make you come closer." Quiet. "How do you know?" Tomas asked. "Because one of them was my mother." He put his face against his knees and didn't say anything else. Virgil had been a general contractor for 30 years. When I told them about St. Dymphna's the shelter, the combination, my grandfather's rule. Virgil looked at me for a long time. "Aurelio Restrepo was your grandfather?" Everything in me went still. "You knew him?" "I subcontracted some of the electrical work on that renovation. He showed me the basement. He said it was for when the animals go first." Virgil paused. "He said when the animals go first, the people follow, and you need to be underground." I sat down on the concrete floor because my legs stopped working. 20 years. He'd maintained that shelter for 20 years on a prediction everyone in the family treated as eccentricity. And here was a man who'd seen it too, who'd heard him say it. We left the Sunoco as a group of 8. Virgil knew the back roads to Vineland. Pilar stayed near Marisol and Nico. Josue walked alone in his own space, carrying his grief like something physical. I was in the middle with the children and the dog, watching Herschel's posture, watching his ears, watching his pupils every time he turned his head. The last 10 miles took almost 6 hours. We moved through a landscape that had been evacuated by something other than choice. Cars in driveways, doors open, interiors collecting dust. Cats on porches, on fences, on rooftops, all facing southwest, all motionless, all with those flat, dilated eyes. We saw a dog in a yard, standing perfectly still. And Herschel turned his head toward it, and the other dog turned its head toward Herschel. And for a second they were synchronized, and I tightened the leash so hard it cut into my palm. At the 5-mile mark, a woman named Darcy Ferris was sitting on her front steps with a hunting rifle across her knees and 2 kids behind her. Everett, 12, and Sabine, 9. Red hair going gray. She watched us approach with the barrel not quite aimed and not quite lowered. "We're passing through," Giraldo said, hands visible. Darcy looked at Herschel, then at me. "Your dog okay?" I gave her the honest answer this time. "He's had episodes. freezing, vocalizing. He comes back, but each time it takes a little longer. She nodded. My dog didn't come back at all. None of them did. She looked at her children. My husband went to check on his mother in Millville. That was day 2. He hasn't come back either. Marisol said, "Come with us." No consultation. Marisol. Darcy hesitated. Then she went inside and came out with a backpack, a sleeping bag, and both children in sneakers. The rifle stayed on her shoulder. We were 10 now. 6 adults, 4 children counting Josue, 1 dog. But Josue wasn't a child. Not after what he'd seen, so I'll say 6 adults, 3 children, a teenager, and a dog. It was at the 8-mile mark, cutting through an industrial stretch of warehouses along a county road, that Herschel had his 3rd episode. This one was different. The hum surged not gradually, but in a spike, a pressure wave that made Nico scream and Sabine clap her hands over her ears. And every animal within sight snapped toward us. Cats on rooftops, birds in overgrown hedges, a raccoon on a dumpster lid. They all turned and looked, and their eyes were flat and dilated, and the pressure in the air had a direction to it. Herschel pulled the leash from my hand. He took 3 steps southwest before I grabbed his collar and hauled him back. He wasn't snapping at me. He was trying to go. The tone from his throat was loud enough to echo off the warehouse walls. I held him against my chest, and I could feel his heart hammering and the vibration in his skull. And I looked into his blue eye and saw something moving behind it that wasn't him. I reached into the clinic kit with one hand and pulled out a syringe and the ace-promazine. I'd sedated 1,000 dogs. I knew the dose by body weight, the injection site, the onset time. 60-pound dog, 0.5 milligrams, intramuscular, deltoid, onset in 15 to 20 minutes. I gave him the shot while holding him against my chest, and he whimpered, and the surge passed, and the animals turned back southwest, and Herschel went heavy in my arms as the sedative took hold. Nobody said anything. Marisol was holding both her children against her. Darcy had the rifle up, scanning the roof lines. Pilar was checking Nico's ears. He was still crying, shaking his head. Virgil and Geraldo and Thomas were standing in a perimeter, facing outward. 3 men with a crowbar and a pry bar and bare hands against something that couldn't be fought. Josue came and knelt beside me. He looked at Herschel, limp and breathing slow in my arms, and he said, "How long does that last?" 4 to 6 hours, maybe less if his metabolism is running hot. And after that? I have enough for maybe 5 more doses. And after that? I didn't answer. We reached St. Dymphna's at dusk. Small brick church, bell tower with no bell, faded wooden sign. The street was empty. The building looked like it had been waiting. The padlock on the basement access door was heavy, recently oiled. I dialed the combination, 4-17-61. The lock opened with a click. The shelter was real. Roughly 40 by 60 feet, concrete walls and floor, metal shelving stocked with canned goods and water and blankets, and a camp stove and a hand-crank radio. A well pump in the back room. And on the wall, in my grandfather's block handwriting on a laminated card, supplies calculated for 8 people, 21 days. God provides. Aurelio provides the rest. We brought everyone down. We closed the metal door. We locked it from the inside. Marisol sat on the floor and pulled both her children into her lap and cried silently. Geraldo sat next to her with his arm around all 3 of them. Tomas leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Pilar immediately began inventorying the shelves. I watched her lips move as she counted cans. Virgil tested the well pump, and water came up cold and clear. Darcy put Everett and Sabine on cots and sat between them with a rifle within reach. Josue sat in the corner with his back to the wall and said nothing. Herschel was still sedated, breathing slowly on a blanket I'd laid on the concrete floor. I sat beside him and put my hand on his ribs and felt them rise and fall and counted his respirations, the way I'd counted thousands of animals' respirations in recovery rooms at the clinic. And this was the moment I understood that my training was no longer saving us. It was just slowing down the losing. We were underground. We were behind concrete. Down here, I couldn't feel the hum in my teeth. Whatever the earth and the walls did to the frequency, it was enough to create a pocket of silence. Real silence. For the first time in 6 days, the vibration was gone. But I knew it was still there. The first 3 days in the shelter had a rhythm. We ate twice a day canned soup, canned vegetables, crackers, the granola bars from the Sunoco stop. Pilar managed the meals with the efficiency of someone used to managing household care plans. Tomas made an inventory chart on the back of a church bulletin, tallying every can and bottle, calculating daily consumption rates. 10 people, the supplies my grandfather had stocked for 8. We had about 16 days if we were careful. Virgil cranked the hand crank radio every morning and every evening. Static on every frequency. On the second day, he caught a fragment, a male voice. Officials saying, "Avoid proximity to the auditory phenomenon. Do not attempt to restrain affected individuals. Do not attempt rescue. They are..." Then static. Gone. They are... what? We never found out. Darcy went up to through the sacristy twice a day to check the church and the perimeter. She reported, quiet streets, growing vegetation, no movement. The overgrowth was starting. She noticed the ivy on the church's north wall growing faster than ivy should, reaching toward the windows. The children adapted the way children do, incompletely and bravely. Everett went silent, sitting against the wall, eating only when told. Sabine drew pictures on the concrete floor with a piece of chalk from Pilar's bag. Nico played with the empty cans, stacking and restacking. Paloma talked. She talked constantly about the supplies, about the well pump, about whether the saints in the upstairs windows were real people, about whether Churro was okay somewhere, about why the people walked southwest. She was processing the collapse in real time, out loud. And I answered every question because if I stopped, the silence would fill with the hum even down here. Herschel was the problem I was counting down to. The ace-promazine kept him sedated for about 5 hours per dose. When he woke, he was groggy and disoriented for another hour, normal post-sedation behavior. The kind I'd monitored in hundreds of dogs at the clinic. But each time the sedation wore off fully, the window before he began orienting southwest again was shorter. First time, about 4 hours of normal behavior. Second time, 2 hours. Third time, 45 minutes before the tone started in his throat and his pupils began dilating, and I reached for the syringe again. I was running through the ace-promazine faster than I'd calculated. 5 doses left became 4. 4 became 3. I switched to half doses to stretch the supply, which meant shorter sedation windows and more frequent cycling. I was managing a palliative drug schedule for my own dog in an underground shelter during the apocalypse. And the clinical precision of it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. On the 4th day underground, Herschel woke from a half dose and didn't come back. I watched it happen the way you watch a seizure, unable to intervene, unable to look away. His eyes opened and they were wrong. Both pupils dilated fully, vertically elongated. the iris color already shifting from brown and blue toward a flat amber. He stood up on the blanket and oriented southwest, and the tone began immediately. Loud, resonant, filling the concrete space and vibrating in the walls. Paloma was closest. She'd been sitting near him, drawing with Sabine's chalk on the floor. And when the tone started, she looked up, and Herschel looked at her. And there was a moment I saw this. I was 10 feet away. I saw it where something passed between them. Not aggression, not threat. A recognition. The flatness in Herschel's eyes focused on Paloma. And Paloma didn't flinch, didn't pull back. And I saw her pupils dilate. Just for a second. Just a flicker. I grabbed Paloma and pulled her away, and she started crying, not because she was scared, but because I'd startled her. And I held her against my chest with one arm and reached for the syringe with the other and gave Herschel the last full dose I could afford. He went down. Paloma cried. Marisol took her from me and held her and looked at me, and this time the look wasn't disappointment. It was fear. His eyes did something to her, Marisol said that night. We were in the corner of the shelter, voices barely above a whisper. The children were asleep. Pilar was on watch near the trap door. She looked at him, and her eyes changed. It was a second. Maybe a pupil dilation response, sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline. Cal, stop diagnosing. I saw what happened. Something in the dog reached for something in my daughter. She was right. I knew she was right. The hum recruited through proximity. The bites accelerated it. But there might be other vectors, visual, behavioral, harmonic. Animals communicate through gaze. Dogs and humans have co-evolved to use eye contact as a bonding mechanism. What if whatever was using the animals had learned to use that channel too? I had 1.5 doses of esomeprazole left, enough for maybe 8 hours of sedation. After that, Herschel would wake up, and he would not be Herschel, and he would be in a sealed room with 3 children. On the 5th morning, I made the decision myself. I didn't announce it. I didn't ask. I picked Herschel up still sedated, 60 pounds of warm, limp dog, and I carried him up the stairs. Pilar saw me and didn't speak. Geraldo saw me and looked away. Marisol stood at the bottom of the stairs and watched me go, and her face was complicated in ways I can't describe. I opened the metal door. The daylight was gray. The street was quiet. The hum was louder up here, a physical presence against my skin. Herschel stirred in my arms. His legs twitched. The sedation was wearing off. I set him down on the pavement. He stood, unsteady, blinking. For a moment, he was Herschel, confused, looking around, looking at me. He wagged his tail once. A single wag, the slow, uncertain kind that means I don't understand what's happening, but I trust you. Then his body oriented southwest, and the flatness dropped over his eyes like a visor, and he started walking. Steady, mechanical. He didn't look back. I stood in the doorway and watched him go until he turned the corner. I was holding the leash. The empty clip at the end swung and caught the light. I went back down and closed the door and locked it and sat on the bottom step and made a sound that wasn't crying, but was what your body does when something is taken out of it. Josui sat down next to me. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on my shoulder. He was 16, and he'd lost his mother to the same thing. And he understood that this kind of loss doesn't need words. It needs another person. 3 days later, the shelter started to fail. It began with a hairline crack in the ceiling, running from the southwest corner diagonally toward the center. Virgil spotted it first. He stood beneath it with a flashlight and traced it with his eyes. "That wasn't there yesterday," he said. By the next morning, the single crack had become a network. Concrete dust fell in thin streams. I pressed my palm against the wall and felt it. Vibration. The hum was in the earth, in the bedrock, and it was resonating through the concrete, the way a tuning fork resonates through a table. Sympathetic frequency. The same principle that shatters a wine glass if you hit the right note. The whole structure is vibrating, Virgil said. It's slow but constant. The concrete is fatiguing. How long? Geraldo asked. A week, maybe less. My grandfather had built a shelter that could stop anything except the thing that was actually coming. He couldn't have known. The shelter was designed for bombs, not for a frequency that came from inside the earth itself. The cracks widened. New ones appeared daily. Dust got into everything. On the 7th day underground, Darcy came back from a perimeter check and told us the church was being consumed. Vines had sealed the stained glass windows from outside. The front door was covered in a lattice of growth so thick you couldn't see the wood. The side door, same. The overgrowth was accelerating, visible in real time. Tendrils extending, leaves unfurling. And Prosper's truck. I haven't mentioned Prosper yet because he arrived on the 2nd day in the shelter. Prosper Munoz, mid-50s, a farrier. He shoed horses for a living, traveling from farm to farm. His truck was an old 70s-era Ford with a mechanical ignition, one of the only vehicles still running. He'd been driving farm routes, checking on clients, and found every farm empty, every animal gone. He'd followed the signs of survivors to Vineland and found the church. His truck, which we'd been counting on as our escape vehicle, was buried under 3 feet of vine growth. Prosper couldn't get the door open, the ceiling cracking from below, the church sealing from above, the truck disappearing. Our window was closing from both directions. We leave, Geraldo said. Today, on foot, northeast, away from the source. We packed in 20 minutes. Before we left, I did something with the remaining clinic supplies that I need to tell you about because it mattered later. I loaded a syringe with the last dose of ecypromazine and another syringe with a measured dose of ketamine, enough to sedate a large dog or a small human. I put both syringes in a hard case in my jacket pocket. Pilar watched me do this and said nothing, but I saw her nod. The vine-covered sacristy window was our exit. Prosper and Tomas cut through the growth with wire cutters and the hatchet Prosper had brought. The vines bled dark, iridescent fluid. Where it touched skin, Pilar made everyone wash with bottled water immediately. Outside, the world had changed. Overgrown, drastically, impossibly overgrown. Grass waist-high, vines climbing walls, trees reaching across streets to form canopies. 11 days since the power died. This was months' worth of growth compressed into days. The hum was louder everywhere, and the air smelled of chlorophyll and ozone and something under both that was sweet in a way that made my stomach turn. We moved northeast. Prosper led with the hatchet, cutting a path where the growth crossed the road. We moved fast because the vegetation was still growing. You could see it if you watched, tendrils extending in real time. At the edge of a commercial strip, we found what the column had left behind. People. Maybe 40 or 50 of them, standing motionless in a grocery store parking lot. Vines grew through their clothes and into their skin and out the other side. Roots extended from their feet into the asphalt. Leaves sprouted from their shoulders, their arms, their open mouths. They were not dead. Their chests moved. Their flat, wide, vertical pupil eyes tracked us as we passed. Among them were animals. Dogs, cats, deer, birds nesting in the branches growing from human shoulders. All integrated, all part of it. all facing southwest. I put my hand over Paloma's eyes, and we walked past, and nobody spoke. The hum surged 3 more times during the walk northeast. Each time, I watched the people around me for signs. Nico buried his face in Marisol's neck and seemed unaffected. Sabine and Everett pressed against Darcy. Josue gripped his own arms and closed his eyes and waited it out. But Paloma. During the second surge, I was holding her hand, and I felt her grip loosen, not release loosen. The muscles in her hand went slack the way Herschel's body had gone slack before orientation. I looked down, and she was gazing southwest with her lips slightly parted, and her pupils were dilated. "Paloma," I said. She blinked, came back, looked up at me and said, "I can hear it, Uncle Cal. It sounds like singing." The third surge, she didn't blink back on her own. I had to shake her. I had to say her name 4 times. When she focused on me, her pupils contracted from fully dilated to normal. But for a second, I swear I saw this, they weren't perfectly round when they contracted. They had a slight vertical bias, just a flicker, just a shadow of the shape I'd seen in Delia's eyes and Herschel's eyes and the eyes of every converted creature we'd passed. Marisol grabbed Paloma and held her against her body and looked at me and said, "Fix this." "I can't fix this, Mari. You brought veterinary drugs. You sedated the dog. You told me you could manage this, so manage it." She was terrified, and she was right to be terrified. And she was also asking me to do the thing that my training had been failing to do from the very beginning: manage the unmanageable, stabilize the unstabilizable. I'm a vet tech. I keep animals alive on the table until the doctor can fix them. But there was no doctor for this. I thought about the syringes in my jacket pocket, the acepromazine, the ketamine, both sedatives, both capable of suppressing neurological activity. If the hum was recruiting through the nervous system, through auditory and visual processing, then sedation might interrupt the pathway. It had worked on Herschel temporarily, imperfectly, but it had bought time. Could I sedate a 7-year-old child with veterinary drugs in an open field during the apocalypse? The dose would need to be precise. Acepromazine in pediatric use is rare, but not unheard of. It's actually the same compound as some human antipsychotic medications, just formulated differently. I knew the veterinary dose by body weight. I could calculate a rough pediatric equivalent. But rough is a terrifying word when you're talking about a child's nervous system. I told Pilar what I was thinking. She looked at me like I was insane, which was fair. Then she asked me the dose. I told her. She recalculated it based on her experience with human patients and pediatric weight charts she had memorized from years of home health work. We arrived at a number. It was a guess. An educated guess built on veterinary pharmacology and human nursing experience, but still a guess. If it works, it buys us maybe 4 hours, I said. Enough to get to the coast. If it doesn't work, then I've sedated my niece for nothing, and she wakes up and the pull is still there. And if you overdose her? I didn't answer because the answer was obvious and I couldn't say it. The next surge decided for me. It hit while we were crossing an open stretch of county road. No cover, no buildings, just asphalt and overgrown fields. The pulse came from the southwest, and this time Paloma stopped walking and turned and took 2 steps in that direction before Marisol grabbed her. Paloma didn't struggle. She just stood there, facing southwest, her body aligned, her eyes flat. And she said in a voice that was her voice, but also wasn't entirely her voice, "It's not far. It wants us to come home." Marisol screamed. Not a word, a sound. A mother's sound. She picked Paloma up and Paloma went limp in her arms and kept facing southwest, her head turning over Marisol's shoulder to maintain the orientation. I took out the syringe. I looked at Pilar. She nodded once. I gave Paloma a calculated dose of acipromazine intramuscularly in the deltoid, the way I'd given it to 1,000 animals. My niece, 7 years old, gap where she'd lost a baby tooth. She flinched when the needle went in, and then the drug hit, and her body relaxed, and her eyes closed, and her head dropped against Marisol's shoulder, and she was asleep. Marisol looked at me. I have never seen an expression on a human face that contained that many things simultaneously. Gratitude and horror and fury and dependence and love, and the absolute annihilating knowledge that her brother had just injected her daughter with animal tranquilizer, and it was the best option available. We kept moving. The drug held. Paloma slept against Marisol's shoulder. The surges came twice more, and she didn't react. Her breathing was steady. Her pulse, which Pilar checked every 15 minutes, was within acceptable range. We reached a marina on the Maurice River as the sun was going down. Small, neglected, half the boats beached or sunk. But there was one, a 30-foot fishing trawler with a diesel engine old enough to have no electronic ignition. Virgil looked at it. Prosper looked at it. Between them, a lifetime of mechanical knowledge. If there's fuel, Virgil said. There was fuel, not a lot. Enough to get us downriver to the Delaware Bay. We loaded the boat in the last light. Water, food, medical kit, children. Virgil got the engine turning on the third try, and the rough, mechanical cough of it was the most human sound I'd heard in 12 days. The boat moved. The shore receded. The hum faded. On the water, the frequency dropped to nearly nothing. The pressure in my skull disappeared. The animals on the shore, visible in the dusk, standing motionless at the waterline, didn't follow. Whatever the hum was, water attenuated it. My grandfather hadn't known that. Nobody had known that. But we knew it now, and we were floating on it. Paloma woke up 2 hours after we got on the water. She opened her eyes, and they were clear. Brown, round pupils, focused. She looked around the boat at Marisol, at me, at the water, and she said, "Where's Herschel?" I told her. She cried. She cried the way a child cries when something is gone, and they're old enough to know it's not coming back. Marisol held her, and I sat next to them and put my hand on Paloma's back and felt her breathing and watched her pupils. And they stayed round and human. And I let myself breathe. But I need to be honest about something. When the last surge hit on the road, when Paloma turned and said, "It wants us to come home," I felt it too, stronger than before. The door in my skull opened wider, and the sound came through, and for 3, maybe 4 seconds, it made sense. It made a deep, cellular sense, the way a migration route makes sense to a bird. Not logic, something older than logic. And I almost stepped toward it. Josue grabbed my arm. He'd been walking beside me, and he grabbed my arm, and I looked at him, and he said, "Stay here." That's all he said. He didn't explain. He didn't argue. He just held my arm, and I held his gaze, and the 4 seconds passed, and the door closed, and I came back. The people who walked southwest, who joined the column, who let the vines grow through them, they weren't weaker than us. They weren't less human. They were alone when it called. That's all. They were alone, and we weren't. So here we are, on a fishing trawler in Delaware Bay. 11 people. Virgil is at the wheel. Marisol is in the cabin with Nico against her chest and Paloma against her side, both sleeping, and Paloma's pupils are round. I checked them 10 minutes ago. Geraldo is beside his family. Darcy is sleeping with the rifle and her children pressed against her. Pilar is sitting near the bow, praying or thinking. Prosper is watching the water ahead for debris. Tomas is snoring on a bench. Soleil accord. I haven't told you about Soleil. She arrived at the church on our second day in the shelter. Dental hygienist, survived alone, for days in a pharmacy after her co-workers walked out. She's sitting on the deck with her knees up, looking at the stars, and she's humming a song, not the hum, a human song, something tuneless and small and brave. Josue is next to me at the rail. You still feel it? I ask him. The pull? He's quiet for a while. The engine chugs, the water slaps the hull. Less, he says. Over water, it's less. Good. But it's not gone. No. 2 nights ago, while everyone slept, I stood at the stern and saw something on the water behind us. Far away, a shape, standing on the surface, not floating, standing, facing southwest, tilted at the wrong angle. I watched it for 10 minutes, and it didn't move. And then the clouds shifted, and I couldn't see it anymore. I haven't told anyone. Marisol is sleeping with both her children, and they are both still her children, and I'm not going to introduce a new fear into this boat. But I check Paloma's eyes every few hours. I sit next to her while she sleeps, and I angle the flashlight, and I look at her pupils, and they are round. They are round. They have been round since we got on the water. I still have the leash in my pocket, red nylon fraying at the clip. I hold it when I'm on watch, and the water is dark, and the stars are too bright. I hold it, and I think about the 10 minutes at the clinic, and Delia at the door, and the syringe in my niece's arm, and every single decision I made that was wrong, and every single decision my grandfather made 20 years ago that was right. Paloma asked me today, while we were eating canned peaches on the deck in the sun, whether the people in the vines could feel the rain. I said I didn't know. She said, I think they can. I think they feel everything. They just can't come back. She's 7 years old, and she might be right. The engine is running. The kids are up. Marisol is standing next to me at the rail, and her elbow is hooked through mine, the way we walked to school when we were small. And I can feel her weight against my side, real and solid. And the coast behind us is a wall of green, climbing toward a sky that has never looked so wide. We're heading for open water. Josue spotted land to the northeast this morning, maybe Cape May, maybe further. We don't know what's there. We don't know if the hum reaches there. We don't know if anything is safe. But the engine is running, and the children are eating peaches, and my sister's elbow is in the crook of my arm, and the leash is in my pocket. And we are moving, all of us, together, away from the pull, and toward whatever comes next. And I'm checking Paloma's eyes every hour on the hour, because I'm a vet tech and monitoring vitals is what I do. And it's the only thing I know how to do that still matters, and I will do it until I can't. Her pupils are round. For now, her pupils are round.